to break down.
Yeah. So both
and
Spartacus...
if that's a system of slavery, that's a good thing, I would say.
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, let's dismantle the patriarchy. Like,
right.
Absolutely. I mean, we are trying to break down specific systems, so I mean, they're not wrong.
They're not. You actually asked, this is a little bit off topic. Maybe I should bring this up after I tell you all about the Servile Wars. But like, I was really interested when you guys talked about in your episode on femininity last time. What does a decolonized gender society look like? I'm gonna talk about that. I had thoughts on that, but I'm gonna talk about it afterwards because I want to get this out first.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So anyway, so both Spartacus and Salvius, who is the leader of the Second Servile War, the Spartacus War was the third one. He was the last one. The one that came right before him, a guy named Salvius was the leader of that, and both of them worshipped Dionysus. And Dionysus was very, very gender nonconforming. Eunice, the leader of the first Servile War, worshipped Atargatis, who was a mermaid goddess from Syria who made men castrate themselves. Who worshipped her? Yeah.
Holy crap!
Who we will talk more about in our episode on mermaids.
Oh my gosh, you should! So I have a Patreon episode all about Atargatis. And she's amazing. I can absolutely help you out with the research there.
Heck yeah.
Awesome.
So Dionysus was like genderqueer. Sometimes he was depicted as a kind of a beardy guy, and sometimes he was a young, very femme young man. His followers were maenads, always women, drunk, sexually aggressive. The women had all the power in his cult, and they were said to have orgies at which they allowed only the youngest, hottest men. And also, no doubt, had sex with each other. Like, you were grandfathered into the cult of Dionysus. They only at one point were like, you can only come in if you're like 18 to 20 if you're a man.
Oh my god, I love that. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And also, so if the maenads are having sex with each other, then is one more feminine than the other depending on who's doing what to whom, or is that only for men?
So I think that's only for men because the ancient Romans, like, the idea of women having sex with other women, from what I can tell, just completely broke their brains. Like, I don't think they even thought that was a thing. Like, I think it just... Like, mention lesbian sex and watch an ancient Roman completely melt like a snowman in the sun.
God. I'm totally picturing them doing all sorts of, like, weird hand gestures. Like, but how?
But there's no piece. Who takes the penis? That's important to me.
But who is the husband?
Right, I need to know who the husband is. I mean, does this sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
So the other thing is about Dionysus, his mythology. There were periods in his life where he lived as a man and as a woman, and as a non-binary person.
Wow.
Yeah, there is a play called... go ahead.
Can you tell me, like, a little bit about what it means for Dionysus to be living as a non-binary person? Like,
I don't know.
What does that look like in a Greco-Roman context?
It's kind of hard to define. Like, the Greco-Romans really didn't like people to be non-binary, you know? Like, it's like, what clothes did you wear? Can I tell if you're a woman or a man at certain points in time? I'm trying to think about the mythology of Dionysus and, like, where this specifically happened. There was a point when he lived as a woman because Hera was chasing him. And he was like he was the son of Zeus and his girlfriend who was not, and this was like a consensual relationship, like from what I understand, like not, like I wouldn't say girlfriend. I wouldn't say girlfriend if like Zeus had like raped somebody because that was mostly what happened. But this was like, from what I understand, consensual. And his quote unquote,
good on you, Zeus, for doing that at least once.
Right, at least one time. He was the worst. But anyway, he was like, out of wedlock with Zeus and this other woman. And Hera, of course, wants to punish the child for that. So she was trying to find Dionysus and visit him with madness and all kinds of horrible things. And he disguised himself by living as a woman for some time. And it totally suited him. And he liked it.
Yeah.
And I think afterwards... You're right. And I think afterwards it was more about switching and sometimes being male and sometimes being female, as opposed to being like straight up gender binary, like, you know, not either one, you know?
Okay. Okay.
That's what I think, because I think that being not one of the genders would also have broken the Roman brain. Or the Greek brain. And the Greeks were even worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dionysus is the name for the god in the Greek sense. So that he was kind of like brought over to Rome, mainly like via slaves and other people. The other goddess who was at the heart of the first Servile War was a goddess named Atargatis. She was a mermaid goddess. I
love that. That's
her
great.
Followers castrated themselves.
Wow.
And there's all this stuff in her mythology. And to preface this, I'm going to say that my ancient source for this was a guy who was, he was Roman. He was a Roman citizen, also a Syrian by birth, which was a Roman province by then, and a satirist. So it's a little hard to tell if he's satirizing this religion or if he grew up around it and really saw what it was like. It's a little iffy. But his account of it explains how people worshiping at our goddess would kind of work themselves into this frenzy, like this religious frenzy, and then hack off their genitals with a knife and then run around town and throw the genitals into somebody's house. And then,
oh my God.
Right.
Wow.
And then adopt women's clothing and perform women's chores in the house. And I remember tracking this down when I was doing the episode on At Our Goddess that we did, which is in our Patreon. And there are worshippers of At Our Goddess depicted in The Golden Ass, which is the first novel written in the Western Roman world. And it's about a guy who gets turned into a donkey by, I think, Aphrodite. And and eventually, I think at one point, he winds up traveling around with this group of traveling priests of At Our Goddess. And this is how they were depicted, and I think probably this is how they were seen in ancient Rome, is this sort of these traveling hucksters who were, you know, conning people into paying them to do, quote-unquote, miracles for them and stuff. And that they were really genderqueer. And there's a lot of, like, transphobic language in how they were described. And they were described as wearing women's clothing and makeup and wigs and, like, dressing up like women. But, you know, like, the source is, like, very clear that these were, you know, people who were outside the gender binary. And that the novel does not like this. Like, it's not, like, kind to these people, you know?
Yeah.
So... and like it kind of just, it was like kind of a window into this ancient bigotry that is still with us, to me.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
And I definitely got this impression of worshippers of At Our Goddess as these like proud gender warriors who are not going to conform to this binary system, you know? And it doesn't surprise me that this religion is at the heart of a slave revolt either. So...
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a goddess who's imported from elsewhere, as many slaves would have been, I'm assuming. So, like, you know, was brought into the Roman Empire by slaves.
Yes. And Eastern, that was a big thing for the ancient Romans. They thought Easterners were effeminate. That was a stereotype that they had. Yeah.
So it sounds like partly really awesome, but also partly like, like these people are being made fun of. Their religion is being made fun of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was being demonized, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, then again, if people are going around and throwing their hacked off genitals, like, into people's windows, like, I don't condone that. That's not cool. Don't do that to people.
I mean, that's where I think that was a satirization, you know? Like,
I hope so. My God.
Yeah.
Like you wake up with, like, a pair of, like, disembodied testicles on your pillow. Like,
not again.
That's not cool.
Right.
Oh, it's been a few weeks.
Every Tuesday.
Gross. Sounds like there's like kind of a grand tradition of religious figures undermining the status quo.
Oh yeah, I think you're not wrong there.
That's awesome.
I think that the fact that all three servile wars had at the root a gender-bending religious tradition doesn't surprise me, because being outside the binary, like the ancient Romans kind of like the ancient Greeks had this too, you know, like this idea that the family was the smallest unit of the state, and the man is the head of the household and rules over the woman who rules over the children. Like, this is all in Aristotle or something. And then that, you know, is blown up to be, it's kind of like the state has like the heads of government ruling over the blah, 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 like all that stuff. Like, this is all kind of seen as a unit in a way. So if you are undermining gender roles, then you're undermining the family. And if you're undermining the family, then you're undermining the state at a larger level, is kind of the through line that I see there. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Like,
and you see it directly playing out in these servile wars.
Yeah. Like you're undermining the authority. You are destabilizing the order of the way that things are supposed to be. And that's literally being played out. Like, I mean, slave revolts are the kind of the definition of undermining authority.
Yeah, and the ancient Romans were all very afraid of enslaved people revolting, you know, because they had so many slaves, and they had these latifundias, you know, and frequently what they did was they would take war captives of conquered and colonized communities and bring them in as enslaved workforces. And those people would have a beef with Rome, you know, and some of them had martial experience. So they were always like worried about that, and they were always really upset at the idea of enslaved people kind of upsetting the natural, what they saw as the natural order of society.
Right, like that, going back to the beginning of all this, like they deserved this, and if you're trying to take it away from them, you're the bad guy. Don't mind the fact that we enslaved you and all of your people. Like, you're the bad guy because you're screwing up this house of cards that we have built upon your enslavement. Like, it kind of seems to me like if you want to be not insecure about your authoritarian regime, maybe don't like go grab slaves from wherever the hell you want.
Maybe don't have an authoritarian regime. I don't know.
Right?
Pro tip.
If you're going to build a house of cards that is built on something that you are terrified of losing, that could be lost at any moment, like, don't build that house of cards.
Maybe don't. Maybe
don't. Way too late for that. I have a career in comedy, so.
We're just like, wait, how about don't colonize?
And I don't think that I really knew that Rome was like so intent on sort of the nuclear family unit as the building block.
I was thinking about this when we did our episode on marriage. There was already so much in like the American like building of the nuclear family unit, which is why I'm really, really glad we're talking about it here, because I definitely wanted to bring that up, that the way that natives were colonized, the way that they eventually even colonized, goes way back, like way, way back, even a little before this.
I was just going to say, like, I want to do a caveat because ancient Rome was sometimes a democracy, quote unquote, like that left a lot of people out and still had, obviously, enslavement. Yeah. So it's a little bit like I probably oversimplified the power structure a little bit of ancient Rome, and some of that comes from ancient Greece and like statehood, you know, but there was a whole lot of appropriation going on, and I still think it's applicable. So somebody is going to be like, but wait, ancient Rome was sometimes a democracy. I just want to put that in there.
Right, fair, but I mean, it's still, I feel like if you take sort of Rome from the very beginning to the fall of the empire, like, you're looking at an authoritarian, like, top-down.
Well, it was imperial, like, if you look at the rape of the Sabine women, which we definitely talked about, like, that, it was a colonizing force from its very inception. Right. When it was a democracy, that democracy left a lot of people out. There were a whole lot of points when it wasn't really a democracy. It was a dictatorship or, you know, one-man rule that was tacitly supposed to be a democracy, but it wasn't. Julius Caesar, looking at you. Stuff like that. And then for, you know, after the death of Julius Caesar and, you know, the rise of Augustus, it was basically a military dictatorship. So, that was the situation.
It's really, really important to note that, like, it's really easy to get stuck when we're talking about mostly American history as Americans in this podcast.